Welcome to History and Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear subscribers and friends and visitors to my channel, I am beginning a new series. Now, usually I do comments on current affairs, focusing on the most burning issues of the day, such as the war in Ukraine or Russian politics or international relations. And I'm going to continue to do that. But in addition to that, once a week, I am launching a new series on Soviet history. Now, all my life, I was teaching and studying Soviet history. What the question that I'm raising in most of my books is what really happened. And I found that a lot of my interpretations are quite different from the standard Western and, of course, from Russian and Soviet interpretations. So this is, in a sense, a crowning result of many, many years of thinking and writing. It's a summary of what I think the major issues in Soviet history were. Now, what you're going to see is a series of lectures that I gave in the past to most of the time to my students or some other form of presentations. The issues that are crucial are well explained in the lectures themselves. Suffice it to say here that we start with the Bolshevik Revolution. And I wrote my first book, The Mensheviks in October, which I will refer to. And I was interested in the issues of why the Bolsheviks managed to seize power in the name of the working class, promising democracy, and then wound up establishing a bloody dictatorship. And the Mensheviks, Marxists, were their major opponents. Now, then I go on to the series of lectures on the Russian Civil War, a crucial event that lasted for 4 years. And again, I wrote a book which is called Behind the Front Lines of the Civil War, Political Parties and Social Movements in Russia. And the lectures will raise fundamental issues as to who were the Reds, the Whites, the peasant rebels, the Ukrainian rebels, and all the complexities of the civil war in Russia. And then I go on with examining what happened in the 1920s. And again, the result of many years of research was my next book, which is called Russia After Lenin. And I have a very, very different interpretation and explanation as to why Stalin came to power and as to why the ground was laid in 1928 for the most tragic event of Russian history, and that is the slaughter of the peasants under the code name collectivization. And then I go on to a totally new interpretation as to why Stalinist terror happened. And that's already in my latest book, which is From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity. And I do describe the terror of the 1930s and then the events of the Great Patriotic War and some of the unusual and unknown pages of history, including what was going on behind the front lines on the Russian-held territory, on the German-held territory, and then on to the issues of a revival after the war, the policies of Brezhnev and the dissidents, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then the horrible 1990s. I'm going to present all of those to you, my dear friends and subscribers. And today is the installment number 1, which is the Russian Revolution of 1917 explained. Welcome. What is known as the February Revolution, 1917. Basically, it was not much of a revolution. There was trouble in St. Petersburg. there were bread lines, and people were complaining, and there was not enough food, and this and that. And then, of course, like in 1905, the stupid commanders, ordered fire on the crowds, and a few people got killed. And the army units, instead of firing, decided to join the protesters. And so basically, in a matter of several days at the end of February, the whole St. Petersburg was ungovernable, and there was no troops to suppress. And the workers went on strike defending their women. Women were in the bread lines, or bread queues in English. And then when fire was opened, workers dropped their work and went to soldiers' barracks, and they beat our women, they killed our women, everybody joined in together, and they started, smashing police departments and police units. Within a matter of days, there was no more gendarmerie, and no police. That was it. It was gone. And then army units refused to fire at the crowds, and there you have it. St. Petersburg is in the hands of the revolutionary crowds. And the first thing they do is they create the Petrograd Soviet, it was called, of workers and soldiers deputies, exactly as they did it in 1905. And so people begin to elect their representatives from all the factories, all the units of the army, to this council. That's what it was, a council, an assembly called the Soviet. And then they just discussing the situation. What are we going to do? What is the next step? They were not thinking of regime change. What they wanted to do is how to organize supply of bread to the working families, how to alleviate the work pay situation for workers, and how to stop the abuse in the army barracks by the officers who live well and eat well, and then the soldiers are punished and beaten and so forth. That was a local issue. Now, when there was no troops anymore left, this is the moment when the general staff joins the conspiracy against the Tsar. It was General Alexeyev, the chief of the general staff, who comes to the train car where Nicholas was at the front and basically forces him to abdicate. Now, again, why? These people were doing what they thought was something right to save Russia and the monarchy from incompetence of the Tsar. So he abdicates in favor of his brother, Mikhail, who abdicated a couple of days later. And basically you have a situation. Russia, for the first time in 300 years, has no Tsar. And nobody thought what an effect it would have. And even today, people are totally oblivious of what it actually meant. People in the histories that you read of the Russian Revolution, the focus is on the provisional government, as if there was a government, and the Petrograd Soviet, because they want to focus on the Bolsheviks who are going to win. Bolsheviks are nobodies at that time. There's 20,000 of them. What is beginning to happen is very familiar to the current Russian generation, and that is collapse of authority, what happened in the 1990s. There is no police. No police means that you could steal whatever you want, you could rule whatever you want. In the townships and the provinces, the governors take over, or anybody takes over who has enough power, military power. It's the beginning of disintegration of Russian Empire, number one. Any state authority of any kind, number two. It is descent into chaos, into warlordism, into disintegration of not only like big units like Russia or Ukraine or constituent parts, into pretty much to the local level of the smallest proportion. Speaking of the empire, Finland, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Georgia become independent de facto. They don't want to. In fact, Finland didn't want to secede from Russia. They thought they were just fine with Russia. Georgia didn't want to secede from Russia. It's that there is no more government. The government collapsed, and they have to run themselves somehow. And this is why you have regional governments that appear slowly, because there is no Russia. But not yet. 1917, there is still a semblance of government, even though it's kind of collapsing. I want to show you the example of collapse is that in St. Petersburg, any armed gang could create a club, like a Jacobin club in the French Revolution, and then seize a building and move in there. For example, the Bolsheviks occupied the building of an actress, Kshishinskaya, who was admired by Nicholas II. It's a nice building. They created their headquarters. The building was empty. She wasn't there. So they thought, hey, why not? We're going to take it over. Why would you take it over private property? Where's the police? Where is the law of private property? There is no police. And the building is empty. So why can't we sit there? We can use it. We're the Bolsheviks. We're a workers' class organization, and we need a building. So they just take it over. And I was not the only one. And on a local level, there are basically gangs of robbers who could just walk into any apartment and do whatever they want. Exactly as in the 1990s. So much murder and rape and theft. There is no police. There's no authority. Technically, there is a police. Technically, there is provisional government. But in practice, they have very little they can do to maintain law and order and to have any kind of policy. So now about the government. This period is known in Russian history as the double government, or dual power. One is the provisional government, and the other is the Petrograd Soviet. Now, what most people don't realize is they focus on the Soviet, and they are kind of describing this period as inevitable march towards communist takeover, which I beg to disagree. It was not so simple. Because the provisional government did a number of very important things that are often forgotten. Number one, it proclaimed an 8-hour day for the first time in Europe and in the world. By law, workers now get 8-hour day. They created mutual aid societies and insurance compensation, all kinds of things that were on the platform of social and social democratic parties all over Europe. It is now a reality. Russia has it. They also invented a new thing, which is never mentioned, but it is in my book on the Bolsheviks. They introduced joint management. They're trying to make capitalism work. They don't want class struggle in terms of killing the bourgeoisie. This is what Lenin is going to do. They are trying to make it work by having the entrepreneurs and the workers work together in the joint managerial boards for the benefit of what they have together, their factories. They want to increase production and have a fair compensation for the workers, which is exactly what was on the books of many socialist parties, but they do it now. The socialist revolutionaries are doing their thing, which is preparing a land reform, a comprehensive land reform, so that all the poor peasants would get land. And if they don't, they would be compensated through the landlord's land. And the landlords would be compensated from the state budget for the lands that would be given to the peasants. They want to do a peaceful revolution and give to the poor, but not just confiscating it. They want to compensate the property owners if those lose their property. They do not want to dispossess the property owners of factories. No, they just want to dictatorship of the proletariat in their terms means you dictate, you don't kill. You tell them what to do. Just like in the past, the bourgeoisie would tell the workers what to do. Now the workers will tell them what to do for the benefit of all, not just one side, for the benefit of all. That is the Bolshevik program in industrial management and the SR program in land reform. That the prime minister becomes very quickly Mr. Kerensky, who is a socialist revolutionary. And there is no real contradiction, unlike what you read in most history books, between the provisional government and the Soviets. There is none. One and the other is run by Bolsheviks and SRs. They are the majority in the provisional government and in the Petrograd Soviet. And then it's a joint government because nothing could become law until it is countersigned by the Petrograd Soviet. So the commissar system, kind of like in France, the commissars are integrated into the police system. Now, that system kind of works more or less for several months, but then there are two events that can begin to shake it very quickly. One is called the June Offensive. In June 1917, Mr. Kerensky orders an offensive of the front. That was a total disaster. The question is, why did he do it? The answer is very simple. These people are playing by the book of the French Revolution. In the French Revolution, when the Republic was in danger, the Committee of Public Safety mobilized the masses and they smashed the enemy and restored the grandeur of France. Now, it was not going to happen like this the second time around. He wanted to repeat the same thing, that the Russian people would defend the revolution and it would smash the enemies and he would gain two things at the same time: victory at the front and stabilization of the new revolutionary government. Well, the reality was a disaster. The Russian front collapsed. The soldiers basically deserted en masse. It was absolute collapse of the front. Collapse means collapse. There was just basically areas with no defense whatsoever. The Germans could walk as far as they could. There was no force to stop them. And they begin doing it. And the only thing that saved Russia was enormous territories. As I told you before, from Brest-Litovsk to Moscow is 1,000 kilometers. Even if the Germans just keep on walking, it would take a long time. So they are beginning to move, but not as fast. To make things worse, there begins new challenges to the provisional government that finally is going to destroy it. In July, there's a so-called July days. The Bolsheviks try to seize power. They're up to their games in the old. Lenin is organizing a coup d'etat. He's back, and his policy is no trust to the provisional government. His policy is kind of like Democrats to the Republicans. No matter what they do, they're not going to accept it. No matter what the provisional government does, no matter how much it gives to the workers, it's never enough, because the policy is to subvert the provisional government regardless, not over policies. It's over power. Power to us, and then it will be fine. Nothing else can be good enough. So they tried to seize power. They defeated. The provisional government survives. Lenin is arrested. He's put under house arrest. He flees. He runs away and hides in Finland, which is an hour away. So that danger is overcome. But then the next month is another danger. This time from the right. There's a conspiracy by a general whose name is Kornilov, and it's called Kornilov Putsch. Kornilov is the Tsarist general of the front who basically says enough is enough of these socialist experiments and all these communists hiding behind the backs of the socialists. We have to put an end to all this nonsense. And he leads several regiments of Cossacks on St. Petersburg trying to reestablish order. Well, he's met by the Red Guards that are armed detachment of workers, and he's defeated. And that brings the provisional government to near collapse. And we're talking about early days of September 1917. And now I know something that most people don't, which is also in my book, and I'm going to tell you this very interesting episode. The Minister of Defense of the provisional government, his name is Verkhovsky. He's a socialist revolutionary, and he goes to tour the front in the first days of September 1917. He comes back and he gives a report, first to the Central Committee of the SR Party, which I read, this report, and then to the provisional government. The report to the provisional government was done on the 9th of September 1917. Nobody knows about it. It's in the archives, so this is only in my book. The report basically says that the front is collapsing, the army cannot survive, and here's my plan. And his plan, as you will see, seems to make sense. His plan is this: tomorrow, Russia declares armistice at the front and conducts mass demobilization. Millions of peasants go home. We will retain only those small, efficient army that is willing to remain. And he argues very convincingly that even 20,000 of mobile, highly trained professional army would be enough to stop the Germans, and it's better than hundreds of thousands of reluctant, hungry, and angry soldiers that don't want to fight. He says by sending them home, we're going to make them happy, and that means we will steal them from the Bolsheviks, who agitate for peace now. By giving them land, we will turn them into our supporters. If the Allies say something, we could say, look, enough is enough. We insist on peace negotiations, which were actually going on because the German Reichstag passed a peace resolution. It was a chance to force the Allies to start peace negotiations. Now, I kind of would like to think, maybe it's daydreaming, but I would like to think that if Verkhovsky's plan was accepted by the provisional government, then the Bolshevik takeover of power perhaps could have been avoided. And that, of course, is what matters, whether they would come to power or whether they wouldn't. Well, it was not accepted, and the remainder of September and October is sort of descent into chaos, and Lenin and Trotsky are preparing a coup d'etat, which it was, with the military units. They take over St. Petrograd. It was called Petrograd, you know, like classical takeover. Post office, railway stations, you know, centers of regiments and power, the cruiser Aurora, which is on the Neva River, and finally the storming of the Winter Palace and the arrest of the provisional government. People discuss to the present day whether it was a coup d'etat or a revolution. It was a coup d'etat, no question about it. However, it's important to understand that 90% of soldiers and sailors in St. Petersburg region supported the Bolsheviks. Why did they support the Bolsheviks? Did they want communism? Did they want to overthrow the bourgeoisie? Did they want a dictatorship of the proletariat? No, no, no. These people had no clue what's a bourgeoisie. If you come up to them and say, are you in favor of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie? They would say, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. They wanted peace. That's what the Bolsheviks promised. Peace now at any cost, even if it means Russia lost the war. That's what they said. We go home. That's what it counts. That's how they got the arms, the soldiers who were armed and trained, who were patrolling the streets, who stormed the Winter Palace. They did it for peace. Their slogan was extraordinarily clever and very popular. Land, peace, and bread. Who in the world would be against this? Now, they did not say dictatorship of the proletariat and red terror and communist rule of our party instead of the workers. If they had said openly, hey guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be the vanguard of the proletariat. We're going to decide for you what is good for you because you are the dictatorship of the proletariat and we're your vanguard. And we're going to give rations to everybody, force everybody to work. Those that disagree, we're going to shoot in the red terror. And that is communism. Are you in favor of it? I doubt that the Russian people would vote for it. What the Russian people wanted was land, peace, and bread. It's totally normal for any normal person to want that. And that is what the Bolsheviks promised to them. Well, another important thing that always overlooked in 1917 is the Bolshevik promises. Usually, of course, we know in Western democracies, candidates promise all kinds of things. But when I studied what they actually promised, it doesn't make any sense. There's no responsibility whatsoever in their promises to double and triple the pay, to make the pay of the unemployed equal to the skilled workers, the compensation for the entire duration of the war. The kinds of things they promised, no government was able to fulfill. It was totally irresponsible, fake promises, just designed not even close to what could be fulfilled. Just absolute lies for naive people who would like to hear what they like to hear. It's going to be great. You're going to get everything. You're going to get compensated for the whole war. And that's how they got their votes. So the Second Congress of Soviets assembles, and it's also very important. When they seize power, they don't seize it for themselves. They call it Provisional Government of Workers and Peasants until the convocation of the Constituent Assembly. That is the government that Lenin formed with other political parties in it, until the convocation of the Constituent Assembly, which was supposed to be elected 2 weeks later, and which it was. They did keep that part. In November 1917, 2 weeks after they seized power, there were elections to the Constituent Assembly, universal suffrage elections that would be the first fair elections until the end of the communist regime. And very interesting, a colleague of mine wrote a book analyzing the results of the Constituent Assembly elections. And in a nutshell, these were the results. Socialist revolutionaries were a clear winner. They got 40% of the national vote. The closest to them were the Bolsheviks that got 25% of the national vote. But remember, of those 25%, 90% was the army and the navy. The next one was Constitutional Democrats, 20% of the national vote. And the biggest loser were the socialists, the Mensheviks and the Tsars, the Mensheviks, who got only 5%. And another 10 went to regional parties, Ukrainian socialist revolutionaries, Georgian socialist revolutionaries, etc. They all had regional parties. The results basically show that the Party of Socialist Revolutionaries was the winner, despite the setbacks, because the peasants still trusted them, the peasants still wanted land reform, and they still voted in their vast majority for the PSR. Another important fact is that people never mention in Soviet histories, or even the Western ones, is that the PSR had 1 million members, 1 million card-carrying members of the party, whereas the Bolsheviks had 250,000 at the highest peak of their popularity, and the Mensheviks had 200,000. So the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks combined would be less than half of the membership of the Socialist Revolutionaries. So that's the important thing. Finally comes a moment, and I'm going to finish soon, January 5, 1918. January 5, 1918. The Constituent Assembly assembles. And this is where the real coup d'etat occurs. It is disbanded by force by the Communist Party, by Lenin. Now that is probably even worse coup d'etat than the seizure of power in October, because there they formed a provisional government, another government like any other government. Here you have duly elected Constituent Assembly that the Bolsheviks promised that they would not do anything against, is disbanded.